Okay, in this exercise we're going to introduce the idea of dynamics. And dynamics in this case will have to do with motion and physics. Essentially what we want to do is to create conditions where motion happens and then let the computer figure out what that motion will be. So for example, if you want a ball to bounce off a wall, you don't have to try to make that happen yourself. You can just basically create gravity and force and let the computer figure all that out. And it's a whole lot easier under most circumstances to do that. Now, NewTek doesn't necessarily agree with me. I had a conversation with someone who called that trying to control chaos. And I'm a sucker for it. I happen to love it. I think it's a very fascinating thing to do. And so this is what we're going to start with. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to simulate a roll of dice. And we don't know what the dice are going to come up with because the computer will figure that out. So if we're here in Modeler, we're going to create a dice table. So if I go to create and I create a box, I'm going to make a very simple table. I'll make that nice and big. How about? And I'll give that some depth. So you see we have a nice little table block here. And then I'm going to go into the next layer, put this in the background, and I'm going to go ahead and make the inside of the table. So we'll give the table some walls. And let's say that we do that. Then I'm just going to Boolean subtract that from the table. And get rid of it. And so that gives us our dice table. And that's as complicated as we're going to get with that. So then the other thing we're going to do, we're going to go into the next layer, put this in the background, and we're going to create a ramp. So we've still got the box tool on. I'm just going to draw a ramp. I'll make that a little bit longer. Actually, it doesn't have to be that long. And give it some depth. And then I'm going to go into numeric. That one's going to have to bend. So we need to put some segments in it. So I'm going to put some segments on all the axes. And that should do it. Then I'm going to go into modify. First of all, turn off box. I'm going to go into modify, bend. And to bend the table, if we were to choose this axis, you see it does something like that. We just basically want to bend it like a tube. And so this is the axis that seems to be giving us that. And we'll even give it a little bit of a flare. How about? No, not that way. A little bit of a flare. So that is kind of a tube. So if you look at it here, yeah, that'll do it. Kind of like a funnel. So then we'll turn off bend. And we're going to rotate that around so that it's the other way. And we're going to rotate it this way. And move it back. And sort of angle it down. And that may be, maybe not, well, actually, well, let's give it back a little bit less of an angle. So that will be our dice ramp. Then what we want to do is we want to add some dice to it. So we're going to load some dice that we already had. And there's a die. I've already seen this one. We've used it before. And I'm just going to go into polygon mode, select all the polygons, and copy them. Then I'm going to go into the document we're working on, and I'm going to go to new layer, put that in the background, and I'm just going to add the dice in there. So edit, paste, there it is. I'm going to move that, up there to the ramp, and I'll make another layer. put these in the background, and I'll paste again. I'll put that up in there in the same area. Stay over there a little bit. And another one. And one more. Move that up there. And that should be sufficient. So if we look at our dice table, we have 4 dice that are going to roll down there onto that. So the only other thing we need to do is to establish some surfaces. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to look at our table here, and I'm going to select, turn off move, I'm going to select this surface, and only that surface. So I'm going to deselect that. So I'm just looking at the table itself. So I'm going to change surface, and I'm going to call that craps. I don't know if that's the right word, but that's what I'm going to call it. Then I'm going to deselect that, and I'm going to select everything but that. I'm going to change surface. I'm going to call that table. Then we go here. And I'm basically just going to select all that. I'm going to call that ramp. And that's it. So I'm going to save this object. I'm going to call it dice roll. And there it is. Then I'm going to send it to layout. So there it is. So in layout, we've got our incredible dice. So basically what we want to do is we want to make the dice actually work. Get this out of the way. And in order to do that, we have to convince the computer that they're real. So the first thing we have to understand is dynamics themselves. If I were to select that one die there, and I want that die to fall, I want to give it weight and substance, I go into FX Tools up here, and I call that a rigid body. And see how it glows there? And then you move the die, and you can see that the die falls right through the ramp and down forever. So as a rigid object, the die has weight and it's got substance, but nothing else does. So if we go to the ramp and we make that a static body, then that ramp has substance, but it doesn't move. It essentially is frozen in space. So if we begin moving the die, it will strike the ramp. So you can see the die is responding to the ramp, and the computer has to calculate that. So in effect, the die is rolling down the ramp. So I'm going to make this also a static body, and I'm going to make the rest of these die rigid bodies. And then basically once I do that, I created the conditions for the dice to roll. So I'm going to give this 600 frames in which to work, and I'm basically going to let the computer figure it out. I'm going to do that by just tapping on the last frame, and it will work out all the dynamics, and then we'll see what happens. Okay, so as you can see, it can take a while to do those calculations, but when it's done, it's done. Now, if I then scrub back along that timeline, you can see that the dice did their thing. They started there, they began rolling, and then eventually they tumbled down onto the table. And that's it. So essentially what we want to do is we want to make that look more interesting. But we never have to do the calculations again as long as we don't change the dynamics. If we move the ramp or change the table in any way, we'd have to rethink it. Okay, so now let's go in on this a little bit and do some other things. Now let's say we want to start with the dice table. So we're going to go to the surface editor, and we want to go to the table. And let's say we don't necessarily want to go nuts with that. Let's just give it a color. So let's just say we choose kind of a earthy brown. And so we'll give that one some specularity as well, and maybe some glossiness, and just a little bit of reflection so that you'll see the dice reflected in a little bit. And let's say for the craps, that one we do want an image. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it planar, and I'm going to load an image. I'm going to load this image I have of a crap table. And so you see, it's hard to see from there, but it's tiled. So I'm going to hit automatic sizing, and that's the wrong axis. And I think the correct axis is the y-axis. So if I take a moment to look at that, there's my dice table. And for the actual surface, I'm not going to give it any specularity. In fact, I'm going to give it some diffusion to take it down a little bit, maybe a little bit of specularity to highlight lights that are hitting it. No reflection or glossiness, and that should be sufficient. And with the ramp, let's say I want to make the ramp wooden. Let's use the same color as the table. And I'll give that some specularity, turn on smoothing, and I'll give it a little bit of glossiness and a little bit of reflection so we can see those dice reflected in them as they go down. And the dice themselves, let's say the dice actually look good, but let's just make sure that that surface has specularity, a little bit of glossiness. Dice kind of do that. We won't make them reflective. Make them nice and smooth. And the dots are fine. Well, actually, let's just make sure that those dots are nice and black. So we're going to make those black dotted dice. And that's basically it. So if we do that, and we scrub through our animation, there it is. So at this point, we're going to make a little movie. So we've been in perspective view. So if we go to camera view, and just select the camera, that's what the camera sees. And we're going to use more than one camera this time. So if we go to camera and we move in on this, let's say we want this camera to see the very end of the animation. So basically we rotate this camera down slightly, and that camera will see the dice falling. And if we want that camera to be static that whole time, we can eliminate that first keyframe. So we'll just hit the delete button, hit OK, and so this is the camera's viewpoint. It only sees that action there. And maybe that's enough. Now let's say we want to take a part of this and see what it looks like. So let's say we take that one and hit F9. Not bad. Maybe a little bit more reflection than we really need on the dice table, but that's okay. So let's say we create a second camera. So we go here under items and we go to camera, and we're going to create a second camera. I'm going to call this Cam 2. And so if we are in perspective mode, see we've got this second camera here. So if we move camera to up here and rotate it this way, let's see what camera 2 sees. So if we go to camera view, go to cam 2, let's rotate it some more until we figure out where we are. And let's move that, say there. Actually, that's not a bad viewpoint now, is it? So let's say we take that one. So we see that. Okay, that's good. And one more. So go to frame 1, add another camera. This will be cam 3. We're going to move camera 3 up. And I'm going to have that watching the dice coming down. So from camera 3's perspective, we will go ahead and rotate that down, and we'll see the whole dice board from there. And there we go. And that should be enough, as long as we can see how the dice turn out. There it is. And as you can see, using multiple camera angles, you can make all kinds of interesting things happen. And you can pan the camera, move the camera, but you can include dynamics in any video that you want.